I'll just share a little bit. I'm probably going to walk some, sit some. These shoes are not the most comfortable all the time. And I had an idea this morning, actually, so just to show you how kind of informal and flexible I want to just be with today. I thought I'd share and just make sure that everybody knows how to find information about your legislature. Right? This is your government, it's your state legislature. We represent you, or we do our best, right? I can't obviously agree with every single person in the 17th legislative district, or probably even in this room. But my hope and my goal is to really hear from people and listen, and then do my best to go back and take forth those thoughts back to Olympia. So we'll get to that here shortly, but I'll just start off with some real basics. I've been elected in 2016, so 2017 was my first session up in the legislature, and at that time I served on state government, capital budget, and the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee, for those who don't know, is basically, I was very thankful to be appointed to that committee. It's a key committee that determines once a bill, if it makes it through the committee process, getting voted on, heard in committee, public hearing, and voted on in committee, if it makes it out of committee, then it goes to the Rules Committee. And in the Rules Committee, those that sit on the committee are the ones that decide, typically, whether or not a bill will be pulled out of rules and then be placed on the floor calendar or list for potential vote on the floor. And so that was a really great experience. Served on those committees for 2017, 2018. This year, and I should mention, I was also assistant ranking member on state government and was appointed ranking member on state government during the interim, but actually did not get a chance to serve in the legislature in that capacity. The reason for that is I was moved to the local government committee, where I now serve starting in 2019 session, and am the ranking member, or the highest ranking Republican member on that local government committee, and also serve on appropriations, college and workforce development, and I sat on the education committee in 2019, and very unfortunately from my vantage point, the Democrats pulled one of their members off to fill a chair vacancy on a committee, and they did not replace that person. So as a result, it was deemed that I should probably, I was the best candidate from some folks' perspectives. We'll see if this stays on. From some of our leadership's perspectives, it just made more sense to move me off of education because I had a ranking member position and more committees than most of our other ranking members. I had 4 committees, so they said, we'll just even it out. You'll be like other ranking members, you'll have 3 committees. I made a plea not to come off education, especially this year, but they took me off. And that's, that I just said, whatever you feel like you need to do, you can do that. So that's a little bit about the committees I'm serving on currently. We have just come to our first week. I think most of you know the legislative session just started this last Monday on January 13th. We have a new speaker in the House, Frank Chop, who had been the Speaker in the House, which is ultimately the highest ranking member in the House, and because the Democrats hold the majority in the House, he was a Democrat Speaker. He was literally one of the 2 longest serving speakers in the nation. He served about 20 years in that position. Long time. long time. And so their caucus decided that it was time for a leadership change, and I think it was, I obviously don't sit in their caucus, but I think overall it was probably a fairly peaceable, procedural process. I know they had, I believe, about 5 candidates from the Democrat House caucus that were looking to take over that speakership, and Representative Lori Jenkins was decided and elected by the Democrat House caucus to take that speakership position. So she started on Monday, she's the first woman to hold that speaker position, so that may be of interest to some. And I had the opportunity to have dinner with Representative Speaker Jenkins. During the interim, I have to commend her. She reached out and made the effort to meet with every single House representative, Democrat or Republican, during the interim. I have a lot of respect for that. There's 98 of us. 98. And do you think her plate was a little bit full, getting elected as speaker or speaker designate in the interim? She had demands on her from all over the place. And I had dinner with her, had a really nice conversation, and, she had the question coming in. She said, well, she had actually asked me this earlier. I had been at another function, and she was there, and she said, what's the major piece of feedback you'd like to give me as a new, incoming speaker? And so I thought about it, because at the time, she kind of asked me off the cuff. We were kind of moving and going to something else. So I thought about that, and when we had dinner, I said to her, Speaker Jenkins, Lori, I said, my biggest ask of you coming in as speaker is to treat others, as you'd want to be treated. I just think that's a healthy value for all of us to have, and she was gracious and said, I think that's fairly amenable by most. And it gets a little more difficult, right, when you're in Olympia, because sometimes you may not like what somebody's doing or saying, and so you may not always treat them like you might want to be treated. But I just, my hope is, as she takes on this new role, we don't know exactly how it's all going to run. She's new. It'll be interesting to see. I will say, we have 60 days this session. It's a short session for us. So on the even-numbered years, which we're in 2020, they're shorter 60-day sessions. And then in the odd-numbered years, those are 105-day sessions, which sometimes go longer if we have a special session. We had really special sessions 2017 when McCleary was running, and some other issues. So that's a little bit, just kind of on background, to hopefully give you a sense of where we're starting from. And, there's a lot of things in play. How many of you, just curious, how many of you follow pretty closely state legislature issues, items? I'm guessing most of you, or you wouldn't possibly be here doing this on your Saturday. But, last session in 2019, we saw a lot of, I'll call it activity, and very last-minute activity that took place, in particular around taxes and the budget, right at the end of session. The last, 2 nights, 3 days, we were up into the wee hours of the night. One of those nights, I know in the House, we were up until, we didn't finish on the floor until 5:50 a.m.
Oh, dear.
Right? Now, really? Why would you do that? And, oh, by the way, budget bills, revenue bills, what we now are affectionately called, ghost bills, running in the middle of the night. Nobody's in the galleries. Reporters really aren't there. This is not transparent government. And many of you who do know me, you know this, but for those who may not, government accountability and transparency is absolutely paramount. And it's not a talking point for me. When I ran in 2016, I put accountability, leadership, and integrity as my key mantras. That's what I believe. And last session was very much not that, in my opinion. There were a lot of challenging things that took place. So, my hope is that will change. We'll see in 60 days. A lot of taxes went through last session, so I don't know exactly what we're going to see this session. There's talk certainly about low carbon fuel standards that effectively would be like a a carbon tax and increase gas prices. You've got capital gains income tax that could take place. This past session in particular, there was the governor's proposal. There was also a bill to, increase, not increase, I'm sorry, we don't have a capital gains income tax today, but it would have put into effect a 9% capital gains income tax. It really is an income tax. People, up in Olympia on the other side of the aisle will say, well, no, it's not really an income tax. But the IRS deems it an income tax. And every state that has an income tax or a capital gains tax uses income tax codes. So it really is an income tax. And many of you probably are aware, but in Seattle, they actually tried to implement their own income tax. And because of the Constitution, there's a uniformity clause that says you can't do an income tax. It's in one city because it's not uniform across the state. So that is in court. We'll see where that ends up. But taxes. There's a lot of possibility for taxes. My hope is because of the key year that it is, 2020, pretty big year in session and after. My hope is we won't see any more taxes. We had, last year there was also taxes on our service businesses. Those taxes were to go to higher education, but those taxes, are significant for our service industry. So whether it's legal field, medical field, financial fields, they got hit with enormous taxes. The REIT tax, real estate excise tax, essentially, it kept the same. It did lower in one instance, or kept the same, but on properties over 1.5 million to 3 million, I'm getting that correct. Basically, it increased the REIT tax, and so a lot of these costs, a lot of times people think, well, I'm taxing the business. I'm going to put a carbon fuel tax or a cap and trade type tax, if you will, on a business. The reality is, at some point, businesses cannot absorb these additional costs. And so they end up rolling those costs over to you all as consumers. And that's the reality. And then it ends up hitting people's pocketbooks, and those are, in my opinion, those are the unintended consequences that people don't always look at. They think, oh, more revenue. Well, at the cost of who, right? You all. So you can probably tell I'm not a tax proponent. I really believe strongly that government needs to live within its means and do so much more efficiently and much more effectively. Some of the other things that we are hearing a lot of, many of you probably have some questions or concerns about Second Amendment rights, gun bills. Obviously, there's been a big challenge this year. In particular, the Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, has been joined this year by Governor Inslee, and they are working to put a ban on assault weapons and limit magazine capacity rounds to 10 rounds. All of these things get challenging when you look at straight constitutional Second Amendment. They are breaking the law by trying to put those in place, in my opinion. Right? Your Second Amendment right is your Second Amendment right, and that is something that I firmly believe. So that's one other issue area that obviously we're going to see a lot of movement on. We are already seeing activity on, and so I mean, this session is going to hold a lot of things. Homelessness, obviously a really big topic, very key concern here locally. We see it, but then how many of you have seen the documentary Seattle is Dying? How many saw that? Yeah. Those stark realities are very real and challenging. And it was interesting because I hadn't thought about this until I looked at that. I watched that documentary thanks to my husband, Paul. Wait. guy in the back. You won't see him up front here. But, you know, Paul actually came across that first, and we watched that. And then it wasn't until something over here doesn't like these guys.
That one spot.
That one spot, okay, the invisible force field. That's why Scott's here, right? It's like, don't go there. The force field. But it was interesting. I didn't even think about this until after we watched the documentary. My niece, who, you know, from Michigan, she had moved over to Ireland. This is more than you want to know about my niece, but she's a sweetheart. So anyway, in 2016, she got married to an Irish lad, lived over in Ireland for a couple years. And she's from Michigan, and came out to visit, and this was probably about, let's see, this had to be 2018. She came out to visit. Her and her Irish lad husband were looking to move up to Seattle, actually so she could go to UW and do her master's there. And so it was interesting. We were downtown, and I was trying to, you know, do the touring with my family, and I got us lost. And I mean, I kind of know my way around, but we were downtown by the Alaska Way Viaduct kind of area, but more actually toward the Pike's Place Market. And we're walking around, and I'm like, whoops, no, this isn't the right way. What is my GPS saying? And ultimately, we were walking, you know, through streets that were pretty dark, not your super back alleys, but I mean streets, and people, homeless people were around. And candidly, I have to confess this, I was so focused on trying to get them to where, you know, we needed to be, and it was cold out. And I said, you know, I'm really sorry, we're kind of going through some areas that may not be the best part of town. I mean, they kind of should be, but, you know, just sorry. And my niece has got a heart as big as a barn, and she said, you know, that's okay, Aunt Vicki. I'm actually glad we're walking around here and then I'm seeing this, because, you know, it just helps me know what is and what's real. And she didn't say that from a standpoint of, like, ew. She said it out of a heart of compassion, right? These people are hurting. And the one thing that, regardless your party or no party or wherever you kind of find yourself on the spectrum, I used to work for an organization called We Care America, a nonprofit based in DC, early 2000s. And many of you have heard this, but they worked really closely with George W. Bush's Community and Faith-Based Initiative Office. And so a lot of it was around grant writing, getting grant writing, you know, equipping nonprofits how to do grant writing so they could go after funds, and just helping nonprofits be more equipped. My point in that is, you know, I care about homeless people just like, you know, somebody else might. Sometimes, though, the way we get to the solution, right, might be different. Because I am a big proponent of local involvement, local control. I believe that nonprofits, faith-based organizations, you know, local organizations here know best what the needs are in our community and have the best ability to deliver. So I say all that just to say homelessness is an issue that obviously is coming up. The governor wants to divert $300 million out of the rainy day fund to try to help homelessness. The challenge is that's not an ongoing, sustainable funding mechanism, and in my opinion, probably isn't the best solution to get there. Personally, if I were doing this, all of it, I would look to reduce your taxes. You'd have more in your pockets, or businesses too. And we have a lot of compassionate people in Washington State and certainly in Clark County. And more people could give to the organizations on the ground that know the needs and could do the work best. That's my take on that. But that's another key issue. And some of the bills, I'm trying to hit kind of overarching things. Some of the bills that I'm running on and focused on this year in particular are business regulatory reform. How many business owners do we have in here? Okay, got a few, yeah. How's the regulatory environment for you? Okay, thumbs down, laughing, yeah. There's like 25,000, I'm rounding it, 25,000 pages of regulatory code in law. I mean, who can keep keep up with this, seriously. And so I've introduced a bill this year to try to implement some feedback that I've heard from local citizens here that are having challenges with agencies. I've really focused that bill on the 4, probably what I would consider heavier regulatory agencies: ecology, labor and industries, Department of Financial Institutions, and also Department of Natural Resources. Those agencies, tend to have more involvement, I'll say, at a really close level and very detailed level with many of our businesses. And, a couple of the areas, the bill, it's a little custom, I'll say, because I really did try to take the feedback I heard from constituents and put it into the bill. So it does everything from, the main thing it does is try to move our agencies from more of a punitive micromanagement type approach, especially when it comes to audits, investigations, to more of a guidance, right? Good faith guidance approach. Meaning, if I come to your business and I'm going to do an audit, I'm going to start off with kind of that innocent until proven guilty theory and approach it from that vantage point. Not to say you might not find something, but if I find something, not to go, I got you, and now I'm going to just whack you with this big old penalty, right? It's interesting because in some of these dialogues with local citizens and some of their challenges, I actually got to talk to a consultant who works primarily, one of his key states, he's in Colorado. And he said, our government's mode of operandi, if you will, is really guidance. And if there's a bad actor, instead of them like going around and being, Sherlock Holmes and I'm going to find somebody, they really wait for the industry to report the bad actors because they come out, right? When there's a bad actor in an industry, that impacts all those businesses in that industry. If the bad actor is allowed to keep going and keep doing what they're doing. So that was kind of an interesting thought, and so I tried to implement that. Also looked at things like, I've heard from various constituents and citizens, I'm in the zone, citizens over in our area, that training, for example, that's required in order to get your certification to be in business. Sometimes the training has no relationship to really what you're doing, your area of business. And it's one thing to be a little bit, here and there's a few things that don't apply. But in one case, literally, I said, so what percentage of the test and the training you have to take, which is how it works? Like 40 or 60 hours, I think, in total, this one industry has. I said, what percentage of this test do you think really is applicable to you? He's like, well, probably around 20% of it. And, so why are we requiring these people to go and take training that isn't going to help them and pay the fees to do that and the time invested? So really just looking at if there's, a lot of feedback, in this case I've said 100, 100 people across the state that say, hey, this training is not relevant, agency, I want you to take a look at this, then it requires the agency to pull together a stakeholder group, and it defines the stakeholder group so that there's some out of the complaint pool, there's some from the legislature, and usually just because the legislature crafts bills this way, I gave the governor an appointee too. No. But at any rate, so really trying to look at how we can create an environment that is more friendly. And the reality is, again, I go back to, if we create a business environment in Washington State and in our area that is not punitive on businesses and doesn't make it hard to do business here, more businesses are going to want to come and locate here, and ideally in Southwest Washington and hopefully the 17th Legislative District. But the more we can do that, then revenues naturally go up, right? They can employ people, those people are paying revenues into the system, the business does well and can thrive and grow. more revenue is going to go into the system naturally. And so it prevents the need for mandating higher taxes on people and on businesses. Some of the other bills I've introduced. Lyme disease. Does anybody know anybody with Lyme disease in the room? Anybody? Yeah, a few. Yeah, I had a gentleman come to me who has Lyme disease. Some of you probably know him. And he's battled it and had it for probably 30 plus years. And it was interesting because I don't sit on health care. I don't have any direct connection with Lyme disease. But he said, you know, there are many who, if they can't treat Lyme disease and stop it successfully, which is, think about the first 20 or definitely 30 days, if they can't get it with an antibiotic, and it's a type of Lyme disease that is more debilitating than that, then in Washington, medical professionals are not allowed by law to keep treating using like a long-term antibiotic treatment. And I thought, well, why not? I mean, if the antibiotics and the antibiotics are legal on the market, and if the patient says, hey, I'm okay with this because I need the treatment, then why wouldn't we allow that? So, you know, I'm introducing that bill. It was introduced apparently in 2015, but for some reason at that time it was turned into a study and didn't move. I will say it was surprising. I held a Lyme disease, I thought it was just going to be a meeting with this gentleman, and you know, he had a couple professionals from the Lyme disease community, and I said, do you think you can just bring one or two other patients like yourself, people struggling with the disease? He said, yeah, I can do that. And so I just thought we were probably going to have 5 or 6, maybe 7 people sitting together. And I had asked some of the legislators if they wanted to join. And so a few were able to. Senator Cleveland, who is the chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee. So I was very thankful she was there because she is ultimately the highest ranking healthcare member in the legislature. And then we also had Representative Brandon Vick and Senator Linda Wilson and myself. And what was interesting about this was I'm thinking, hey, it's just going to be a meeting with like 7 of us probably. I reserved a room it was actually at Hapo Credit Union. That room was packed. I was shocked. And actually the gentleman who I was coordinating with, my friend, he said, I had no idea we were going to get this kind of turnout. But they put the word out and said, hey, there's some legislators going to listen to us in our story, basically. We had probably 30 to 40 people, patients in that room, and we probably had about 5 to 7 that would fall more in that professional category. So I'm taking a little bit of time on that just to say, for those who may think I stay in like 1 or 2 topic issue areas, I don't. I try to really listen to the constituents, what the needs are, and also then see what we can do about it, bring solutions. So I'm interested to see where that bill's going to go. It's bipartisan, got bipartisan sponsorship on it, so I was thankful. A couple other things I'll just mention briefly. I'm thinking, what else did I introduce here for this session? I dropped an advisory votes bill. More technical in nature, probably not going to go anywhere. But how many of you like all the advisory vote items that fall on your ballot every election, especially this election? Do you guys like those? Some do, some don't, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, it's a mixed bag. And what's interesting is this time around, we had 12 advisory votes, I believe, on the ballot. And you already have a ton of stuff. This 2019 is when, the election and all those advisory votes happen. And the idea, and by law, what the advisory vote is intended to do, what it says is, anytime there is a tax enacted in legislation, that you'll be putting out an advisory vote on that to see how the people feel about that. Fine with that, except when the whole story isn't told about that bill. And that's what happened this year. There was, I know my good friend Todd will remember this, there was a timber tax fee bill that ran and an advisory vote as a result. And basically the advisory vote, asked about, it implemented a tax on the timber industry, and do you want this tax repealed or continued? Well, the party didn't tell you about it, and then it listed everybody who voted for it. Well, I was one who voted for it. And most of our, that was a heavily supported bipartisan tax, I'll call it. But what it didn't tell you in the advisory vote was the rest of that story. The reason that myself and my colleagues voted for that was because it also provided essentially a reduction in tax over time. So the two offset, and over time, it was actually reduction in taxes. So it wasn't an implementation of taxes. The exemption piece would actually be a value to the timber industry. But they were willing to take a fee, which then turned into terminology, a tax, and it appeared on the advisory vote looking like all of us as Republicans had voted for a tax on the timber industry. And I came unglued. Like, that is misleading at best. And in my opinion, it weaponizes, it becomes a political weapon, that advisory vote, against people like myself, who it made me look like I'm for taxes and that I tax the timber industry. And the reality is that reduced taxes overall on the timber industry, and they actually asked for it. But did you get to read that in the advisory vote? No. So my bill just says, hey, anytime there's a tax or a tax exemption, those things will be explained. You'll get to see the net effect of either. And the title of the bill is misleading. So I said that the title of the bill must be included. And also any net change from when the bill is introduced to when the bill passes. Right? That can change dramatically. From the time a bill is introduced, amendments that get put on, the effects of those amendments, all the way through the process. That's another one. And then the other one is regarding the mobile home industry. I don't know how many of you are aware, but I've had a lot of emails. Rents are going up in a few particular parks, mobile home parks here. And so I am not in favor of nor a proponent of rent control. That's not free market, so I'll never do that. But I thought, what can we do? I mean, really, what can we do to try to help these people? And it's not a widespread problem, but this goes back to the bad actors, if you will, right? I mean, it's their park. They can charge what they want. But there are realities of people that are potentially going to lose their homes because they can no longer afford the increases in rent. So I thought, okay, let's look at incentivizing the landlords, right? Let's try to put into place a tax exemption. Had to come back, maybe I should look at a tax credit, but I'm actually dialoguing with Representative Ed Orcutt in the 20th District, who also has some of these mobile home park rent increase challenges. So more to come on that. I've also been really focused on sex trafficking prevention, still very focused on that, and had a bill, this will be the third session I've run it. I'm very thankful, I will say, to have a bipartisan effort on this. And essentially my bill, well, let me start back with. The goal of, I'm running two bills, but the one that I'm really focusing on, because I think the other one's going to be run by Senator Cleveland really this year. The one that I'm focusing heavily on is to reduce demand of sex trafficking, right? I mean, if we could reduce demand for this heinous crime, then hopefully we can make a dent. But that's going to take a while. So basically, the law says currently for the end user, I'll call him the John, right, that actually commits this heinous crime with children, sex trafficking. In this case, just the act of having sex with a minor. If they purchase that, then in law today it says that a penalty may be assessed of up to $5,000. Still could be zero. And so the first year I ran the bill, I just changed it to mandatory $5,000 fee. And I'll tell you, I was really thankful to be able to start the bipartisan sex trafficking caucus in the House of Representatives. Representative Tina Orwell, who's a Democrat, and she has been a champion to fight sex trafficking long before I came around. But I got into the legislature, talked to one of my colleagues who sits on public safety, and I said, look, I really want to work on sex trafficking prevention. Who's working on this? And he's like, oh, Tina Orwell, you need to get to know her. And I'm like, can you introduce me? So literally, I went up to her, this was in 2017, and I told her I wanted to work on this issue. And she was great. She just turned around and she said, you know what, if you start that caucus, I will run on that with you. And so we did. And I say all that to say, I was bringing this bill forth, changing it to mandatory fine penalty of $5,000. And we were meeting in the sex trafficking caucus, prevention caucus. And that day I had some survivors come. And actually Tina had invited these particular folks. So I was just sharing with them, I said, I've got this bill and it just changes it to say instead of up to $5,000 penalty, it makes it mandatory $5,000. And their faces dropped. I mean, they were like, kind of like, is that all I'm worth? Yeah. After I went through this, I'll call it garbage, is that all that's worth? And that was so heartbreaking. And I just said, and it was bipartisan, and I said, it's a starting point. So, come around last session in 2019, in the Public Safety Committee, bipartisan effort, very thankful, Representative Orwell sits there. The ranking member and the chair and Representative Orwell actually took and changed that language, because the other thing I ran up against was the judges want to keep their discretion. They don't like being told what they have to charge. So you can't tell them to mandatorily charge $5,000. I just thought, really? Like, are they the focus of this situation? Okay. But, okay, we're trying to move this forward and get it passed. So in the Public Safety Committee, bipartisan effort, we worked together and changed the language to $3,500 to $7,500, some fee in there. Well, I just had a conversation with the senator over the, essentially, I think it's the Judicial Committee, and who is an attorney. So we're going to end up changing the language probably a little bit. It may not be exactly what I want, but the good news is there's movement. We're getting there. So my hope is we can get that through this year. I think I'm going to stop there. The only other thing I'll mention real quick is just working hard. One of the bills I just had a hearing on this week, again, kind of regulatory and tax reform for small business, is to increase the B&O filing tax threshold to, it would change it to $36,000, really for cost of inflation, but it would give our small businesses the chance to keep more of their money longer instead of having to pay that. Oh, yes. Thank you, my good friend. And essentially would allow them to keep more of their money longer and, not have to pay in taxes. They could reinvest, hopefully, into their business, grow their business, grow jobs. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to get that, at least, again, out of the House. The Senate's kind of been the sticking part, so we'll see. And then as my good friend just reminded me, I'm like, how could I not think about this and mention this right off the bat? So the very first day of session, the first rally, big rally, that was held at the Capitol was on $30 car tabs. I-976, thank you, my friend. How many of you feel, well, you don't have to raise your hand, but you are welcome to if you like. How many of you would like to have $30 car tabs in place? Anybody? Yeah.
They're already in place. It's all the additional tests that they throw in there.
Well, yeah, and there's also part of the challenge is up in Seattle, like sound transit situations. Part of the issue is the amount assessed, right? You're looking at the vehicle, the price for the vehicle. It should be on the Kelly Blue Book, right? That's what is standard. And instead, Puget Sound area basically changed that years back, and they have their own little formula on that. So, they've basically inflated the price of your car and then are assessing on that. And that's really not appropriate. So that's kind of a smaller jurisdictional look at that. But the bottom line is the voters have spoken. They want their $30 car tabs instead of all the fees and all the excess. And I don't blame you, and I agree. And so I-976 was the initiative that was run by Tim Hyman to basically put the $30 car tabs in place, hold that as the limit. And then as soon as the voters voted for it overwhelmingly, 53% across the state, said, yep, we want our $30 car tabs. Stop charging us so much, right? And instantly after that happened, King County and several of their friends basically took it to court to deem that unconstitutional. So, it's ridiculous. The voters have spoken, and I think some of you probably read an article in the Reflector on this, and I was pretty taken aback. At an earlier legislative forum, this was in January. It was blurring together, end of December or January, I think. We had a legislative forum, and a couple of my colleagues across the aisle, one who sits on transportation, we were asked about 976 and the impacts, and she said, she made some comment, but she said, well, ultimately you can't always listen to the voters. And I'm like, you didn't really just say that, did you? I'm listening. I may not always agree with you, but I am listening, right? And then one of our colleagues reiterated it a couple comments later. I thought, you guys really don't. And I like those people, don't get me wrong, I thought was not appropriate. So all of that to say, I've heard you, and I believe when the voters speak and you said you want that, it's done. So the good news is we are, as Republicans, we are running, and I've signed on to a bill that is sponsored by Jesse Young, Representative Young, to basically put in place $30 car tabs. So I've co-sponsored that bill, definitely be supporting that. I think those are probably a few of the key things right off the bat. Comprehensive sex ed, we can talk about as much or little as you want. I will just say this, I'm very opposed to that. I've heard quite a bit from many parents, grandparents, that feel like their values are being trampled on if these comprehensive sex ed bills move ahead. And, I would argue, why aren't we letting local control decide this, right? Why are we trying to preempt local control by slamming something through at the state level? And I sat through the public hearing and work session on that this week. I know several of you were here or there in Olympia for that. In short, the standards that would allow around comprehensive sex ed, and there's two bills effectively that are moving. One is House Bill 2184, sponsored by Representative Monica Stonier. And that's the one that was heard in the House Education Committee this week. And then the other one is left over from last session, Senate Bill 5395, which was sponsored by Senator Claire Wilson. And in effect, they would both do the same thing. Put in standards that would allow and mandate, not allow, mandate all school districts and all public education students to have to learn about comprehensive sex ed, which includes kindergartners, if the bill's passed as they are, on kindergartners. Why would a kindergartner ever need to know about, one of the curriculum I was just told about, and this, not even Flash. Flash is the one that many school districts are already using to some degree, and is probably the most graphic. I mean, literally, if I held pictures up here, most of you would go, oh my gosh, and wouldn't even look at it. But no, instead, we're going to teach our children, and I'm seeing one who's a good friend and a little younger, I'm not getting into too much, but we're talking genitalia parts. In kindergarten, there's a curriculum, and bottom, let me just say this real quick to clarify. The bills, if you read them, pretty much read fairly innocuously, right? It's not like you will teach anal sex, oral sex, abortion issues, gender confusion, whatever. It's not prescriptive like that, but what it does do is it mandates standards, and those standards, once, they have standards now, but not for comprehensive sex ed, and certainly not down to the kindergarten level. But basically what it would do is it would mandate that certain concepts are taught as part of that. So comprehensive sex ed, it would include all things at kindergarten. There's a curriculum opening the door to this, would be curriculum called the 3 R's. It's just one of the curriculum approved by OSBI, and it has for kindergartners lessons that be taught words such as, top parts, bottom parts, think your genitalia, words, right? Why? And they also said in the work session this week, which was made up of OSPI, a battleground curriculum director, effectively, and a phys ed teacher and a parent. But basically, one of them was talking about, well, in 2nd grade, we're going to start teaching about how dogs make puppies and cats make kittens. Why? Why do they need to know this in 2nd grade? It is crazy. I'm like, what on earth are you doing to these children? And so, anyway, I wasn't on the education committee formally, but I went and I sat there and I faced all my colleagues in the chair, sat in my green scarf, and I sat there looking at all of them, and I had sent them emails prior, and my last sentence in there was, and most of it was, I'd like to testify, I understand you're calling on the public first, you should. But I just said, I am strongly opposed to this policy, will continue to be, and I said at the bottom, why would we seriously do this to our children?
Amen.
Why, ever? And you know what, if you feel like this is so important, right, as a parent or whatever, schools could provide resources to parents, right, or make the resources available to parents. But when you start bypassing parents and their rights to decide what they want, what they want taught to their children or not, I mean, this isn't math. This isn't English, This is a topic that most of us blush about when we talk about in the room, alone having somebody teach it to these children and then they role play it. I mean, really? Anyway, encounters of, if you're on a date and it's just wrong. It is so wrong. I mean, I can't imagine our parents or our grandparents would ever have allowed this in schools or wanted to put their taxpayer dollars to it. So the good news is, I should mention, I will take this opportunity to mention, I am working on a bill. I will drop it this session, and it will be called something to the effect of the true opt-out, the true education opt-out bill. Maybe true comprehensive sex ed opt-out bill, not sure. But the bottom line is it will allow for parents to be able to essentially think of a voucher bill, right? It'll be a scholarship, probably type program. It effectively will let parents decide where they want their children to go to school and allow the taxpayer dollars to follow them.
Amen.
So that's awesome, because if you, I wasn't planning to talk that much about this up front, but you know, with the Conference of Sex Ed bills, a lot of folks that are promoting these bills say, well, there's opt-out. The parents can opt them out. Well, you might be able to formally opt them out today of these things, but the reality is it will be weaved into other parts of the curriculum, right? So California, for example, you can Google this right now as we talk. If you look up Brea, B-R-E-A, Olinda, O-L-I-N-D-A, Unified School District, their assistant superintendent was basically pressured by parents to answer the question, are you teaching pedophilia?
Yeah.
Pedophilia to our kids? And she said, well, it's in the context of historical aspects. Are you kidding? That is sick. And this is the lead-in to those things, right? I mean, so, and I'll say one last thing about this. In my short little, I wasn't going to talk a lot about it. Here's the other thing. I talked to a reporter after that public hearing. Probably not a good idea on my side. I had to call back and apologize later. I was so upset how that hearing went. Anyway, I said, the very things that they are purporting to try to protect kids from, right, are the very things they are teaching that will drive those outcomes. So, I've heard different stats. I've heard everything from 20%, transgender students are, 20%, all the way up to, I've heard 60% more likely to be bullied or commit suicide. Okay, well, if that's the case, why on earth am I going to start teaching and promoting gender confusion in the classroom? To start, especially at young ages, start making these kids think, they don't know. I mean, they don't know. Oh, well, maybe let me think about that. Let me explore that thought. And, they could think they're a giraffe one day. They could feel like, I want to be a butterfly. Oh, now I might be able to get other sex. Really? So you're promoting the very behavior that will then lead to those horrible outcomes you say you're trying to prevent.
That's right.
The other thing is, we hear a lot about, a lot of people, they're raped as children and, in the home. I am not saying that doesn't happen, and I am not saying that is not horrendous, and that my heart does not go out to those people and those victims. Yes, it does. So, on that note, why on earth am I going to start introducing sexual concepts? I mean, this is beyond what we all grew up with, here's a picture of a women's inside parts, or here's the outside of the men's parts. This is literally talking about, well, there are options to have safe sex, you can do the withdrawal method. How does that say? First of all, and why am I starting from a presumption point that kids are going to have sex? Why am I starting from that assumption point? When we grew up, most of us, not all of us, but many of us, that wasn't expected as the norm, right? This needle has been moved in our society. And so if I really want to prevent more rapes and things like, these horrible activities being done to certainly children, but people, then in theory, I wouldn't start at younger ages introducing them to the concepts of sex and all variations of it that will then take them down those roads to explore with others. I get them in a state where they can't control themselves as young children, students, and they might take actions against somebody else. The hypocrisy of this is so blatant. So please feel free to contact your legislators about that, and especially the Education Committee. With that, I am going to turn this over for questions in a minute, but as I said I would, I want to, okay, Scott, I'm ready to see if I can do this. Ding, ding, okay. So, how many of you know how to find a bill? Okay, I've got the informed folks here, right? For those who don't, I just want to make sure everybody does know. This website is a public-facing website. It is where you can find most anything on your state legislature. Great, easy way to remember it. It is www.leg, think your leg, .wa.gov, G-O-V. So now, anytime, anywhere you are, and you hear something and go, is that really true? Or I need to contact my legislator. This is where you do it. And we'll just do a really quick info session on this. So, can you see along the left-hand side here, these are your key easy navigation points. So you can find any of your representatives here. I'll just click on me. You can go in here and find Kraft. Oops, but it helps when I spell it. Okay, so just some real quick things. Homepage will take you to my Truly homepage. But here's where I would suggest, and if you want to contact, email, here's all our building information. My committees are here to the right. Here's where I want to point your attention to, details. Click on details. You will see along the bottom left here, my voting record will pop up. I will say I've had some inaccuracies on at least one or two items, but so for the most part, they should be fine. Bill sponsorship. You can see by biennium, started in 2017, so we're in 2019-20, primary sponsor or co-sponsor. So secondary sponsor means I've co-sponsored. So somebody else has introduced the bill and I've said, hey, great idea, let me sign on to that. Focus on the primaries. Right here, you can see everything, that I've introduced in this biennium. I'll take just a quick, let's see here, we'll do this one, the 1738, just had a hearing on this. So this will tell you the title of the bill, relieving burdens on small business by updating the tax return filing thresholds to reflect inflation. Here you can see who sponsored, co-sponsors, and we'll tell you where the process is. Now, this is not apparently up to date because I just had a hearing in committee. It just was heard in the finance committee. But you can see, going down, you can see historically, the 2019 session was when it was introduced. You can see, what actions were taken. You can see very quickly, last year was heard and voted on in the finance committee, majority for substitute bill do pass. You can see who voted for it. So I can see the majority report that will show everybody who voted for it. You can also, if not everybody votes for it, it would also have a minority report and would show you who did not vote for it. And then you can see here, January 16th, we just had the hearing in the House committee. So the other thing I'll just point out quickly, if you scroll down, you will be able to find the bills. It's currently in a substitute form, so if I click on substitute bill, I can read the actual bill language. And if you want the more abbreviated versions, these bill reports are a good way to see what's the summary of the bill. So very quickly, these briefings will show you what it's intended to do, the title, sponsors, what it does in short, and then you can read the background. So I wanted to take some time on that because not everybody knows that, but I absolutely believe everybody should know this because we're here for you. We are not, shouldn't be that way, and we certainly shouldn't be here for a special interest. But was that helpful for anybody? I hope a little bit. Okay, kind of a quick Cliff Notes version on that. Okay, so now I'm going to take questions from the audience. I honestly did not think I could talk for that long myself, but I hope this has been informative. Right, I'm trying to hit on some different aspects for you. Questions? Nothing's off limit. I will do my best to answer, and if I have to get back to you, I will. First one on scene. Green sweater. Yes.
Hi, my name is Joanna.
Hi,
I've
Joanna.
met met you once you came to my house when you were canvassing. I just wanted to point out, you claimed that when you were a kid, or when all of us were kids, other kids were not having sex as much as they are now. I'd like to point out, I've done a lot of research on this. When kids are taught comprehensive sex ed, they actually choose to wait longer. They're more discriminatory when they choose a partner, and they are safer when they do have sex. As a parent of 4 kids, I am in favor of comprehensive sex ed. And you poo-pooed the idea that people would be safer and they would be less, that they would be safer if they don't hear anything about comprehensive sex ed, that they'd be safer if they don't hear anything about being trans or gay or bi. And the truth is that when they are represented and they see that they are normal, kids are safer. We know from studies that one supportive adult in an LGBT kid's life means that their chance of attempting suicide drops. So these are things that concern me, and I'm wondering, you made the claim, and I'm curious if you have evidence to back it up, that kids your age or when you were a kid were having less sex than they do now.
Well, and I appreciate the questions, Joanna. So I think to clarify, what I believe I said was that it wasn't the norm, as in, not everybody was expected that they were going to have sex. And I would say certainly in our parents' and grandparents' age, that wasn't the case. Go ahead.
Maybe no one expected it, but they were still doing it. So now if we recognize that when we teach our kids how to be safe, we teach them how to wait and words and language of how to say no thanks, and then how to respect that no, kids are safer and they do wait longer. Studies show that.
Well, so I will mention, there are studies, and I don't have the chart, my good friend Randall has it, but literally over the last, since about 2010, safely, there has been an increase in sexually transmitted diseases in Washington State, right? So more, I'm just going to use that, it's chlamydia and gonorrhea. So if we look at just that, there is more sex going on, I would have to presume, because there's an increase of the unintended consequences, right? The reality is, before that time frame, it was a very low number. And so the more that these concepts are introduced and made normal, my concern is, especially as, I won't say children, but teenagers, certainly they can be more explorative, I'll call it. I don't want to say promiscuous, but whichever. And I would like to think that just because somebody says no, especially a girl to a guy who's a fairly good-sized guy, maybe a gentleman on the football team or whatever, that gentleman will respect it and say no. My concern is that isn't happening. We all know there's more rapes right now than there certainly were probably 40, 60 years ago. No, I don't have the science right with me. I could look it up. But I would... The thing is, the values that were taught back then are different than what they're being taught today. And the dangerous outcomes, I can sit here and try to, I can go get some data for you, and I'd be happy to do that. And if you don't mind, either get me or Patty your information, I'd be happy to do that. But just if we look at, in the news, the number of rapes, the sex trafficking. I mean, sex trafficking wasn't a thing. Really, right? Even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it probably was hitting. And again, I don't have my exacts, but 20 years ago, nothing like this. And that's where my concern is. The more that these concepts, most kids, when I was growing up, certainly anal sex, oral sex, didn't know anything about it. Now we're going to make that part of our normal conversation. And the more we normalize, Joanna, I appreciate you asking. Right? That's where I think that if there are parents or grandparents that feel like that is something they want their kids to learn, or if they want them to be, introduced to other ideas, that's your choice. That is your choice. Those are your children. They are not the government's kids. And that's the challenge that I'm dealing with as a legislator. Really? If OSPI wants to make this available on their website, and you as a parent say, I want my student to be taught that, then you can have the access. access, and you can have that conversation. And, you know, I have heard parents, right, that won't teach it, don't teach it. My challenge is that is a minority of people, likely, you know, because most parents want to be the parent of their child.
Yes.
So I don't want to make the standard for all students tailored, I'll call it, or standardized to the lowest common denominator. And when I say lowest, I mean the most minority group of people that don't feel comfortable talking about it to their students. I'll take one more question on this from my.
There are a lot of people who don't realize this, but a lot of the sex trafficking is family member to family member. So if you're relying on family members to teach kids how to be safe in a sex trafficking situation, you need to do it to everybody. You need to do it in a public situation, because not every family is protected. Not every family is, you know, up on, you know, sexual health education. Not every family is willing to talk, and you have said yourself that everyone is uncomfortable talking about this. You said everyone will blush. Sex education teachers don't blush. They know how to talk to kids, and they can get their point across.
Well, and that may be true for some. I would say not all, from what I've heard. I'm going to come back, and so I appreciate your questions on that. I'm going to go ahead and back to Daphne real quick on that.
My name is Daphne Russell, and I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I teach for Vancouver Public Schools. One thing I was curious about with this issue is I hear about people being quite upset about the FLASH curriculum, which is a curriculum that's adopted by Vancouver Public Schools. As a fourth grade teacher, I don't feel that I teach anything horrifying to fourth graders. We talk primarily about just girls or boys are separated. We talk about just, this is your anatomy, just because everyone should know what, and the kids often they don't know, just they don't understand just basics. And we spend a lot of time talking about pure relationships and decision making in a very non-sexual way, just talking about like how you get along with people, playground issues, just general decision making. One thing I would say is that there's the presumption that all mainstream teachers want to teach health education. Like, I'm not sure that I'm super comfortable with it, but I have attended the Vancouver Public Schools teacher training on our curriculum for 4th through 12th grades, and I would say, as both a teacher and as a parent of 2 Vancouver Public Schools students, a 7th grader and a 10th grader, I've talked to our children about what they were taught in class, and there was nothing that was very graphic. There's nothing that, I mean, honestly, it was far less graphic than anything that they could just find on their own. And it was more, and the training that I received was very much about give factual information. This is not a time to politicize. It's not a time to talk so much about, like it's very fact-based. So I don't know that I need an answer today, but I'm having a hard time understanding why, because my experience is that the health curriculum is very much compartmentalized within the school system and is not woven throughout every subject area.
Well,
just
I'm
an
glad to
observation.
hear that. Today, it's not. So, you know what you're describing, Daphne? Probably not a big deal to many parents as far as reproductive. And if we're really talking just the reproductive parts, and you know, it's trying to be respectful behavior, right, to others, not violating others, we'll call it privacy. My concern is that's where we are today. And you know what? If at local levels, that's what is working and that's what parents want, why don't we let local levels keep choosing that? Right? But there are some places, especially nearby in Battleground, and now they've adopted it, I've heard. One did not. Say thanks to Tina Lambert for not adopting it, in my opinion. She's here today. But if, you know, if we want to, you know, go down that road, then why don't we let local levels My challenge is, okay, so fourth grade, that's where we are today. But literally, what has been approved by OSPI, now they haven't approved on the kindergarten level, but curriculum that has been approved and is ready to go for that, does talk about body parts and things that, why? Why are we introducing it at younger and younger ages? Why do they have to know that? And I am challenged by things like, they are teaching that, the withdrawal, or not everybody's teaching this, but they could teach, the aspects of, anal sex and oral sex. Some do talk about that. There's so much that this opens up the door to. And abortion, I haven't really spent any time on that. Abortion, that's another topic area that a lot of parents aren't comfortable with their kids knowing. And that's where, if you want to land nowhere else, you say, okay, well, leave it at local control, right? I just don't see where the state has any place mandating for all students things that, you might be comfortable with something, Joanna might be comfortable with another thing, others in here may not be comfortable with some things. That's where I really get challenged. This is, people talk about safe touch and, unwanted touch being a reason for this. Really, if I'm doing it, I say this. If anybody touches you below your neck or above your knee, that could be an area where it might be unwanted touch. I don't have to go into my body parts, really, with young kids. I don't. But yet we're going to go there. Well, I'm just saying, it can be that simple if we want it to be. But it really needs to be the parent's choice, in my opinion. And that's where, if nothing else, this really needs to be left at local level. I'm going to move on. We've got 15 minutes left. So I'm going to move off this topic. I'm happy to stay and discuss other things. Do you have another issue? Yes.
I just had my name is Craig Sarah. Just the observation about the all the debris on the roadsides, how dirty it is and stuff. And I've complained about this for years, but nothing's ever been done. And one thing I did mention before is like in Canada and like in British Columbia, their roads are really clean. And I think the reason is because they have these big signs all over the place and $2,000 maximum fine for littering. And we have these tiny little, $200 fines or whatever nobody pays attention to. And I don't think it's people just randomly throwing stuff out of their windows. I think it's these trucks and everything else that go around with uncovered loads. They don't secure their loads at all. I see that all the time. And I wish the legislature would do something about it to mandate, fines or whatever.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Craig. This is it's not obviously been probably one of the hottest topics out there, but it has been discussed over the last few sessions I've been there. And it's interesting because the tax that's actually supposed to be collected to go toward litter cleanup has been diverted, out of that purpose. So again, one of the other, government saying we're going to collect some money for one purpose and then it gets diverted for something else. That is something that I know, even in Southwest Washington here in Clark County, I've heard discussions on that. I think if we use the funds for what it was intended for and actually did some cleanup, that would be a first good starting point. Beyond that, hopefully we wouldn't have to mandate and regulate that, but I hear your concern on that. So I think our biggest benefit there, big bang for the buck, would be, trying to use those funds for what they're intended for. And, if there are really bad actors that continually, don't abide and do the littering, that's another thing we could look at. So, but thank you. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do Gary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kraft. And I just want to make a comment and then a question. And my comment is, thank you for this town hall, the way you have an open mic and people are allowed to ask questions and you answer and then they're even allowed to question your answer. Conversely, last week I attended Monica Stonier's town hall meeting and she's not transparent. She did not have open mic. You had to pre-submit your questions. Then she hand-selected whichever one she wanted to answer. And a majority of the people there were there about the comprehensive sex ed. and they only spent like 8 or 9 minutes on it out of a 90-minute session. And yeah, it was sad. But that's my comment. I appreciate your bravery, and I want to point out their cowardice to not be trained.
I appreciate the comment, and I will say, just for the record, I held a mental health forum here actually on the 7th of January, and I did take cards and questions only because that's not an area of expertise of mine, and I did want to vet out kind of which questions might be relevant for the panel. So to be transparent, there we go. But thank you. Do you have a question?
Yeah, my question, I have a 3rd grade daughter at home, and she's in the Evergreen School District, and in October, I called to find out from the school district, how can I view this material, comprehensive sex ed? And I had missed the October 15th date, that was one date, and then I was told the next date is March 15th, 5 months later. So I've got to wait 5 months.
Perfect timing, right? Okay.
I had to wait, I'm still waiting, and I don't trust Representative Stoner or Representative Santos or their hand-selected work group. And I want to view this, and I want to make my own decision on my daughter. And it's sad. What are they trying to hide? And I don't want to trust the teacher either. I'm a parent.
Yeah.
Public record request. They have to legally respond.
And there's an expert there on that. So I was going to say, we actually have an Evergreen School District Board member here. So Rob, would you like to share a quick thought? No,
Just
perfect.
to enjoy the ride.
A business card. Thank you. Thank you. Well, and thank you for that, Rob. And that's how this should work, right? There should be transparency, and I'm not saying there is or isn't everywhere, and districts may have their own policies. I will say this: these are your kids. These are your kids. So if you want to see something they're being taught at any time, in my opinion, Rob will be happy maybe with this. I don't know, but the bottom line is, they're your children. And I get from a teacher standpoint, it might be disruptive. You don't want 20 parents coming in and having to corral them or put up with them. But the reality is, when you are asking to see something that your child is being taught, you should be able to see it. So, with that, and I will say, thanks to Dick Rylander. So that was the other bill I forgot to mention. I am running an Open Public Meetings Act, thanks to Dick Rylander, who did a public records request, has done several to Battleground School District in the past, and just around many different things he does. But one of the things that came out was that agendas for open public meetings are posted 24 hours in advance. I'm like, why not farther ahead? Right? This is, again, your government. You should have time to figure, to see what's on the agenda. If you like or don't like something, plan to attend, plan to bring your friends if you really want to get people to share their thoughts. So at any rate, I'm working on that as well. Other questions? I'm going to come up, John.
Representative Kraft, thank you so much. Brief comment, thank you for introducing House Bill 2330, the government accountability. Many of our government agencies come at you and their approach is you're guilty until you prove them innocent. And I'm one of the citizens that went through that dialogue, and it ought to be you're innocent until proven guilty, number one, and as you appropriately alluded to, number two, the government agency ought to help the small business person become in compliance instead of trying to nail them and say you're a bad person. So that it's a wonderful bill. Thank you. The broader issue for citizens in our area overwhelmingly is transportation. We experience daily a nightmare in people trying to get where they work, to their doctor's appointments and whatnot. And I absolutely applaud you for fighting for new transportation corridors, new bridges across the Columbia River, because many jobs of Southwest Washington citizens, as well as services that we desire or need, are across the river. Thank you. We have 8 elected representatives on the Bi-State Bridge Committee. I wish you were one of them. Sadly, you are not. My input to the citizens and to you is to ask the 16 legislators, 8 from Washington and 8 from Oregon, how much will your efforts improve traffic congestion? Right now, they're talking in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 billion. They're talking tolls and all these things, yet they have given zero specific guidance on what they want to see for our money. They want to spend billions of our dollars, and they're not telling the government agencies, I want a 20% improvement in traffic congestion. I want an improvement in freight mobility. And that ought to be the direction from our legislators to the government agencies. So thank you. I've seen you there. I've seen other citizens. Keep fighting for us being and for being our voice.
Thank you. And for a third bridge or crossing. And yeah, I mean, good grief. We could talk about this all day. You guys have, over the years, heard so much about all this. But the bottom line, yes, to me, when this whole discussion, you know, it's been around forever for those of you who've been in Clark County all your lives. I have not, actually, but I've been around long enough. So the traffic congestion problem is the real thing, and that is what has prompted all the discussions about the I-5 corridor and what do we do, and then as this discussion has continued, and you know, as John Lee has mentioned appropriately, you know, since I got into the legislature in 2017, all the discussion, the legislation that ran, besides mine, mine was to do a consultative study, $300,000, to look at current viable paths for a third bridge. But all the other legislation in Washington that has run and passed is to replace the I-5 bridge and to put the work group together. So I want to mention that and call that out as a good thing with Oregon. But the dialogue has really focused primarily on replacing the I-5 bridge. And so I've said this in informal meetings with my colleagues and the bi-state transportation meetings and commission has happened. I said, you know, you've got to determine, they had listed all these different outcomes that could happen as a result of this project. You know, more safety, bike and pedestrian, you know, opportunities, just different things, about 6 or 7 things. And I said, you have a list here, and you have to determine what your main objective is. Because until you do that, if your main goal is safety, it's going to drive one outcome. If your main goal is reducing traffic congestion, which when I go around to the doors and the neighbors after session, that's one of the top issues I hear about, are people going, I have to sit in traffic. I want to be home with my family when I have to commute back and forth to Portland. And I said, if you do not determine what your primary objective is, what you build could totally miss the mark of what's needed. So, you know, depending on your outcome and objective desired, that's going to drive your plan of action, right? And the reality is, it's just all boils down to, in my opinion, the traffic congestion has been the discussion and the issue and the pain point. So that's our number one objective, is to relieve traffic congestion, and doing it without forcing you all on some mode of transportation out of your vehicle that you may not want to take. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about mass transit, buses, light rail potentially, more focused right now on bus rapid transit. But I always go back to a PEMCO survey that was done in 2018, summer of, and that survey basically said out of 1,200 drivers, or not even drivers specifically, but people surveyed by PEMCO, the question they asked of 600 Oregon people, 600 Washington people was, what mode of transportation do you prefer to take to work each day? And 94% said, my vehicle. I prefer to drive my vehicle. Why? Because it was faster and more convenient. So why am I going to try to not, as a legislator, not provide more paths across the Columbia, ways for vehicles to travel, whether I'm a commuter or freight, which obviously impacts our business community and our economy. Why am I not going to try to build more capacity so we can get more vehicles across faster? That's it. Why am I going to try to force you to do something you may not want to do? I'm not a dictator, and none of us as legislators or government elected should ever be dictators. And that sometimes is what it feels like. So with that, I will keep fighting for third bridge, third crossing. So thank you. Back real quick, Carol.
As far as the sex education goes, society has become much more centralized. It's become a culture. So would the populace be happy if state government was teaching a religion? Or say, for instance, some other cultural type thing? I remember way back when we used to have the communes. So it's not the place for our state government to start teaching a cultural thing. And that's what I think is such a sex education thing actually is. It's a cultural thing, a societal cultural thing that has been incorporated, and now people want the school districts to teach that. And I think that's wrong. So we have basics that the state is required to do, and I think that's really all we need the state to be focused on. The other thing is there's 3 bills that are going before, that are being proposed in the Growth Management Act, and of course you know how we feel about the Growth Management Act, but those 3 bills are saying that for any kind of development, any home building, any of those kinds of things, in the environmental section of it, it requires a no net loss. So right now, the language says no net loss. So that means if you're going to put your home site there and there's trees or whatever that they want you to preserve, then you need to try to make it so that you haven't lost anything. Well, now these 3 bills are saying, now you're going to have to enhance it. So it's an enhancement bill. So that is saying the state government could tell you to do any number of things as an enhancement. And that's going to drive up housing. That's going to prevent housing, literally prevent housing. And it's just going to cause more homelessness. You know, when we start throwing in all these environmental laws, basically the end product is homelessness because costs. Now we have people who are, I was just watching a video that's saying, these people are saying, I'm educated, I'm a college educated man. I make a decent wage, but I can't afford the housing. So, I mean, we're not just talking about people that don't have jobs. We're talking about all of our populace, and as time goes on, we're all going to start feeling that crunch. So, you know, I'm just throwing in 2 of my ideas and 2 of my thoughts here that I think people need to really seriously think about.
No, I appreciate that. You know, in the first, we won't spend a whole lot more time there, but I do. I mean, I hear from parents, and some might think, hey, I want you to teach this in the schools, but I hear from a lot of parents that are like, you know what, the student outcomes are down, right? Graduation rates down, the level of competency. And I'm just gonna have, it may not be every district, right? But I'm just seeing I hear from a lot of parents, regardless, I can tell you this, a lot of parents that want to just focus on the English, math, science, history, you know, focus on the basics. That's kind of where many come from, I mean, not all. The other piece I'll hit on, so it was interesting, I actually had a conversation about the environmental piece and the increased regulation regarding, you know, it used to be net neutral, if you will. In this case, I'm planting and making sure you have the same number of trees. But the increase requirement now, I mean, there's things even around the Shoreline Act, right, that also are requiring that increase. So you can't just, if you take some out, you have to put them back. It's like you have to improve the land. why is that the constituent's responsibility? I mean, I go back to, it's your land, right? And there's your starting point. When you get past that, when, and ecology is obviously, in my opinion, one of the big offenders of too much regulation and micromanaging in your property and your rights. I agree, it's a challenge. And I actually had a gentleman from Department of Ecology who said they were concerned because at that time, the governor hadn't really made, there had been some conversations, in particular with that shoreline act. There had been some conversations the governor had with like the tribes and environmental, and the agency didn't even really know what they were supposed to do with it. And I'm sorry, that might have been DNR. Regardless, one of those two, and they were supposed to come speak at the conference I was at, and literally didn't come because I don't think they had even been given the proper guidance yet. So there's just a lot of regulations, and especially when it comes to your private property rights, that's your property, right? That is your property. So, big proponent of that. With that, I want to be respectful of time. We're at 12:05. I will take 2 more questions, and I'll ask not on comprehensive sex ed, just so I think we've covered that. Let me do this. I'll go to Rob, and then we'll finish up with Chuck, and I'll stay around until 12:30 if people want to ask me more questions. Rob?
So, I have 90 questions. I guess I get to pick one. I'm thinking about education, of course.
Of course.
Of course. But I think about it in terms of workforce development. I've been thinking a lot about the shortage in the trades, all the construction that's been going on, public and private. If we build a new bridge, those shortages will increase. And how to bring those businesses, graduating seniors who can enter the workforce. Okay? In terms of this session, I know we're not holding out great hopes for piles of money.
I haven't found the money trees yet.
No, neither have I. Neither have I. It's an interesting balancing a budget when you don't grow the money yourself. Keeping our students safe and supporting their needs, getting the staff we need to serve our students, and helping us afford the insurance that our staff deserve. As I'm on the legislative committee of the State School Directors Association, and we've been talking about that intersection of school funding and health care and how much more expensive that it's getting. And I'm not talking just about Evergreen here, I'm thinking of the Center, Battleground, Waukegan, all the Southwest Washington small districts whose fiscal position is endangered because of that rapid increase in healthcare costs. So how do we get there? What do we get this session that you can support? And beyond that, everything that you do, including the homelessness efforts that accrues to the benefit of a child, is going to accrue to the benefit of schools. So I'd like us to think very broadly about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I want to recognize the reality and the feedback that we've received, and I know you were there at the ESD meeting where several educator administrators attended, and when basically SEB was enacted right now, all the educators, instead of having local school district healthcare plans negotiated, if that has now moved up to the state level, the healthcare benefits. And with that comes some changes. Probably some good for some districts, but others, are looking at costs, and it's change in some senses. And here's the thing, I struggle with, I'm just being really candid with you all. Since I've gotten into the legislature in 2017, we have put $10 billion, roughly, eight safely. We're really worried about it at 10 now, $1 billion into K-12 education. Not saying it shouldn't have happened. I voted for McCleary. I had some challenges with the funding mechanism, but I want to recognize, one, I'm not saying there's not needs, but we have put a lot of money right now into K-12. My hope would be that since part of that, trying to get a solution in K-12 that was very comprehensive, part of that was to try to get I'll call it the collective volume discount, right, from a state rate of health care and health benefits, may not always translate down that way exactly for every school district. And I know the ESDs have struggled, especially with some of this. So this session, I'm not inclined to look at extra funding. I'm just going to be really candid. We're at 60 days. I think there's been a lot of money that has been put into K-12. I do think it's challenging for local districts. I know Evergreen has, and Battleground. Our local districts here have real challenges that you have to deal with when it comes to negotiations, right?
Yeah, in a large sense, Evergreen's been able to balance its budget and support the costs for SEP. And there are a couple of tweaks that I think are dropped in a couple of bills that I'm positive will be supported almost unanimously. But it's that, I guess what I want to say is we want to give our employees exactly those benefits. They attract the good ones, right? Then we get good teachers in Southwest Washington, good staff supports, and we can support kids with that. It's keeping it what policy changes there could be to make it a little more fair. There's a worry that we won't be able to pass a levy with the higher tax thresholds that are now permitted.
Well, and see,
I just kind of want to put that bug in your ear.
yeah, no, and even your last statement, you're concerned that you won't be able to pass a levy because of the higher rates now, right? And that is part of the challenge and the reality. I mean, I hear you, but I do believe part of the challenge is, as we put more money into K-12, which ultimately is the only way to get more of that money, right? We had to shift to do all this obviously, but for everybody's sake, instead of local levies per se, it was all shifted to the state level in the 2017 bill that was passed with McCleary. And then follow on after 2017 in last year, basically the legislature majority, not myself and not many of my colleagues, but they allowed the higher levy lid, again, at local levels. And so now we've opened it up again. I mean, we all heard, or you guys probably felt and we heard, the challenges that taxpayers face when McCleary hit and the state property tax aspect became real. I mean, I remember going to one gentleman as I was going around the doors in neighborhoods, and he literally said to me, Vicki, I own my home, but I am getting to the point now where I cannot afford my property taxes. Right? And I'm like, this guy's retired. He's not going to get more money. And so, again, when we find the money trees, Rob, we are going to be in great shape, you and I. But right now, I would just encourage our school districts, and you're not going to like the answer, but to really look at how things are being done and see where you can try to bring more efficiencies, try to hold the line.
That was kind of last year. We cut 11 million off the budget. And,
which is awesome, thank you.
That was a focus in central office. That meant higher class sizes, which isn't necessarily that good for kids who are struggling with social emotional things. And so, I think I would say to you, yes, we have been and will continue to do all of those things to seek efficiencies. And we'll keep telling you whether or not it's meeting. I guess the biggest thing is special education. The mandates exceed the funding.
Well, I will tell you, I voted for the special education bill in 2019, and I was challenged. Honestly, I almost didn't do it. I'm going to be really candid. Because of what I just said, we have put so much on our taxpayers. You all, you're not taxpayers. You're people. You work hard, you make money, and then the challenges, right? Everything we do, whether it's at local levels or up there, it costs money. And I'm like, it all comes down to prioritization, and then that gets back to, whether you want to call it comprehensive sex ed or social emotional learning, or maybe it's offering some extra other curriculum area. and we have to figure out where to do it. I also do have some ideas around special education, maybe some ideas. I don't know from a cost standpoint how much it could benefit. I don't know that that's really my goal in those thoughts, and I'm not ready to share them today. I'm having some dialogue with parents that have special needs kids, but I do question whether we're down the right path on that as well. And I have had one conversation briefly with the chair of the Education House Committee and even Representative Stonier. So anyway, I hear you. I'm not going to increase money right now to K-12. I'm going to ask you guys to do your best to prioritize and hold the line when negotiations come. I know they're difficult conversations, I'm not in them, but ultimately when you're trying to bleed, not you, but they are trying to bleed blood out of a stone, it's got to say no. I mean, I understand, contracts are contracts, and everybody needs to adhere to that contract. In my opinion, I'm not a legal attorney, not a legal advisor. Anyway, that's my thought. Let me do this. Do you still have a question? Okay, let's do this. And I'll continue till 12:30, but then I am going to wrap, and we're probably going to have to clear out of the room pretty quickly. So am I okay with that? Anybody kicking me out? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Vicki Kraft, for standing for our values and our issues that are many out there. I'd like to mention about 3 things real quick. I've talked to a sophomore at Camas High School, who's our neighbor right across the street from us, and the young man said to me that he knows boys in his class that they go to 6 different classes, and they have 6 different names, a different name for each class, including a female name. This is, all this stuff is messing our kids up. It needs to stop, number 1. Number 2, kids need to be able to have prayer back in their schools. Prayer was in the schools in America for almost 200 years, okay? And they talk about the separation of church and state. Show me in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence where there's a separation of church and state, okay? I mean, how come it wasn't, if that was the case, how come for almost 200 years it wasn't enforced? Okay, so kids need to be able to have prayer sessions in school. If they want to be able to pray, they should be allowed to do that. Also, okay, where's our Constitution in our schools any longer? Our Constitution has been removed from our schools. Put our Constitution back into our schools. Teach our kids what our Constitution is. Okay? And last but not least, okay, remove government waste. Okay? Get rid of government waste. Get rid of government just throwing billions of dollars away. They're taxpayers' money. And I've talked to an elderly lady in my precinct, since I'm a PCO in my precinct, and she said that they've lived here for many years. And their taxes are on their homes have gone sky high. They said that they're going to have to sell their home. They can't live here any longer. So anyway, these are the issues I wanted to bring to your attention.
I appreciate that. And I concur. So first item, prayer in schools, First Amendment right. Constitution, First Amendment right. This is what we're historically based on, so students should be able to be taught those things. It's still our law today, although we're seeing a lot of eroding of people trying to erode that law, especially as we look at the Second Amendment right now. But that is why it's important for our students to know the truth about what the basis of our, and foundation of our country and our state is. The third item you mentioned was waste. Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that. I sit on the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, JLARC, and when I ran in 2016, I actually said then that I wanted to be on this committee because it looks at how the government runs, and it's the accountability arm, one of them, for government. And what was interesting, I'll focus on one thing and quickly mention the second. When I was in the private sector in the technology field, before going into the legislature, this was like 2014 timeframe, I actually worked with not for, but with the state of Washington government agencies, and I was working for a technology company. The central IT agency for the state was created to basically support the IT services and provide them for the state agencies. As I got into my job, and I'm working up there and learning how everything works, I realized pretty quickly, I'm like, this central IT agency has to be losing lots and lots of money. I'm like, most of the agencies didn't have the confidence in that central IT agency to even host or provide their IT services. If they did, it was the very basic like email, right? Yet this whole agency with hundreds of people have been created and been running for 10 or so years. And, I just thought, they've got to be losing a ton of money. So sure enough, I get into the legislature in 2017 and asked OFM for a meeting, got the budget, the expenses and revenue for this agency, and sure enough, it's called WATEC today. At the time, it was Consolidated Technology Services, or CTS. They had been losing up to $16 million per year for 10 years. Mind you, this was when McCleary was going on, right, 2017. So I'm like, okay, and I had a meeting with our appropriations ranking member, Representative Bruce Chandler at the time, and I said, Representative Chandler, first time meeting him, I'm like, having a meeting with him. I said, I know obviously we're trying to find money for McCleary, and that's something that really has to take place this session. You might want to look over at this agency over here, Consolidated Technology Services, or now WATEC. They're losing a lot of money. There's a lot of bleeding going on. So literally, the Appropriations Committee, that session, commissioned a state audit on that agency. It took place immediately. And they found the next year, the JA heard the report that, yep, indeed, as I mentioned, was the case. They've been bleeding severely, as I noted, and the customer service rating from all the agencies they were supposed to be providing IT for was so low, most of the agencies weren't comfortable using them, right? So they went ahead and they commissioned Gartner, which is a leading consulting company, one of the right ones, I would say, to definitely be doing this. And Gartner came in and said, well, here's what we find. And so after Gartner had done the report, I called a meeting with Gartner, the WATEC agency leadership, and the chair of the state government committee who was hearing this issue at the time. And I said, so tell us about the report. What would you recommend? And Gartner, for example, they said, well, we find, for example, this line of business is losing money. You could either turn off or do away with providing that service, think email, but not email, or you could roll it up under a more profitable line of business, right, and then call it profitable, in effect. And I laughed and I said, well, I don't blame you for taking that approach. If I'm the consultant, I would do the same thing, because we've given you no guidance yet on what direction are we really trying to move here. Are we really trying to make things efficient, prevent waste, or are we just trying to kind of make it look like we're not losing money? And I said, this has been going on too long, and it's time to rip the Band-Aid off. For all the people in this agency, it's not fair to them to try to make this work when it clearly isn't, and they're like shaking their heads, yes. And the chair said, well, I know, but there's people's jobs involved. I said, I understand. My goal is not to take people's jobs away, but when an agency has been created that it's clearly not working, we need to be real about that. We need to keep the things that work, keep the people that can make those things work well, rip that Band-Aid off once, and there are, other places many can work. I said, but we owe it to them as the agency, and most importantly, we owe it to you all as taxpayers. And you know what they did out of that? This was unbelievable. I thought, yeah, well, I was moved off state government. Don't know if that's the reason why, probably not. But They brought in a CIO for the state who had come from Pennsylvania, who had succeeded in mandating and forcing all the agencies in Pennsylvania to use that central IT agency. So we're going back to the trying to force agencies to do something they don't want to do model. Now he's trying to fix the service, and we'll see. I've told the state auditor's office I want an audit on this in another 3 years, 4 years most. But to your point with waste, right? That should never happen. So, I mean, real quickly, I know we've got 5 minutes. I saw a question here.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about the on Margaret Island, taking the household budget approach to education. And so when I hear you talk about it, I hear you talk like in a general sense like that. If we just don't have the money, and we're going to take a household budget approach, people need to tighten their belts. And then the statement ends there. And I just feel like in the interest of clarity and honesty, it's always important to go to the outcome also and say that the outcome of that is that there will be students who don't get the support they need for learning, whether it's a smaller class size or counseling service or nurses, and just say that's the way it is. We just can't raise the money now, but at least be honest and say outright the effect.
Correct. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. We won't be able to do everything. And so thank you for bringing that. This is like, and I don't mean to just oversimplify it, and I know it kind of does, right? But that household budget, it's like, I might want to go have my $1,000 shopping spree every month, right?
But that's my analogy. I even filtered the analogy, but I'll go with it. It's not the $1,000 shopping spree. It's there's a leak in the roof that we really can't afford to fix now, but we're not going to pretend the roof is not leaking. It is, but we can't afford to fix it now. Let's just say the whole picture for clarity and honesty.
Right. No, you're right. So let me bring it back to something that you hit on that is real, right? I've certainly heard. Many school districts are asking for more nurses or counselors. The mental health challenges, what kids are dealing with today, very challenging. This is not the standard answer, nor is it really what most educators are probably asking for. What I have asked, and I actually in the education committee 2019, there were 2 students, they had a panel, and the bill and the topic was really around more nurses, counselors. We had a couple of students and there were a couple other experts with them. The students, one of them had tried to commit suicide like within the last 2 weeks before sitting right in front of us. That's what they said. And these were high schoolers, and the other one really was, coordinating kind of these group feedback type discussions or efforts, I'll call it. And so I said to them, I'm so sorry to hear, that it's been so challenging and recognize there are things, realities that our students are dealing with. I said, one of the thoughts I have is, knowing that we can't grab money trees that don't exist and fund counselors and nurses all across Washington like might be desired. I said to them, I asked them, would you be open to, and do you think it'd be beneficial if we tried to have our school districts partner maybe even more closely with some of the nonprofits locally that might be able to provide those services? And I know many do, right? I know many do. But where we can try to do more or make those things more accessible or make you aware of them, would that be helpful? And they both said yes. And the gal, surprisingly, she said to me, I just asked that question on a survey that she had completed. And I forget, it was at least I think 100 or more students. But she said, yeah, that was one of the things that came back. So to your point, we can't do everything.
But where would the funding for those nonprofits come from then? I mean, then you've just shifted. It's still the same question, right?
It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. So that goes back to what I said in the beginning about and this, like I understand, this is a very different thought process in some respects than what is happening. The way I look at things, I really honestly do believe that if we taxed people less and we got the government doing less of it, so it costs cost more money. I'm not saying certain things shouldn't be, right? Schools, if we want to have schools, transportation, there are things that I do think the government needs to do because, you know, as citizens, it's much harder to deliver those services, right? But my point being, the less money we take from you or from businesses, ideally, right, in taxes and or regulation costs, the more money you all as people and or businesses have to give to a nonprofit. I will say this, so you guys are going to get I'll share this with you, my husband's heard this. So how many of you are familiar with the Southwest Washington Community Foundation right here in Vancouver, downtown? Anybody? Okay. I'm a grant writer by background portion of my time, and I've met with them before. They're doing great work, and kind of in short, they do a lot of work helping to, you know, when donors want to give, usually larger sums of money, but when they want to give money, they can give it to the foundation, and the foundation is vetted and work with, you know, different nonprofits that, you know, they can essentially kind of be a clearinghouse, for lack of a better word, and those monies can go through to the nonprofit. You don't need a clearinghouse, right? We can go to any of our favorite nonprofits and give, but I'm just saying here, I think, you know, let's put more money back into people's hands so they can give to the organization of their choice. And the organizations, many times on the ground, they do know what's going on. You know, I had a mental health forum here, totally not my area of expertise. But I did it because there is such a need with mental health. And so, no, don't sit on healthcare, not an expert at all. But I really felt like the reason I did it was because we are at a point, especially with Western State Hospital being decertified by the federal government, and now, you know, civil cases are coming back into our communities. There's already a lot of need in our communities. We have to have every hand on deck here in our communities to try to provide help for these people in need. And I'm looking at it kind of from a nonprofit level, a faith-based level. You know, we had local government here. I see your hand, I'll come back to you. And my whole, honestly, my biggest goal, and I told everybody this, is I said my biggest goal in holding this forum today is to have you all get the opportunity to meet some of our local, what would be considered mental health experts, but really so they know who you are in the community and you know who they are, and you can hopefully offload some opportunities and services. And one example that came out of this, I mean, again, I just was facilitating. I didn't get his last name. Brad, who's the executive director with Community Voices, our board, or CVAP, he mentioned, you know, there's I'm thinking it's the Horse Traumatic organization, but that's not it. There is an organization, a nonprofit, that provides like post-traumatic stress therapy, if you will, something to the effect of horseback riding. I know one of those organizations, and that's what's stuck in my head. But at any rate, he mentioned another type of organization like that, and I said, you know, Brad, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. If we can take, in this case it's veterans, but somebody who's struggling but hasn't really gone to the point of crisis where they need real severe help, but they are challenged and struggling, maybe we can get, I'll call it lower level or entry level intervention with a therapeutic nonprofit. They can get some relief that they need and not hit the crisis point. Then we prevent the need for more money going out, whether it's from a nonprofit to do the service, which in my opinion is an ideal model, or, you know, the government especially. And so try to be a little more creative in how we look at some of these things. And I know in some cases it's probably oversimplifying, but I just really think what we're doing isn't working. And to me, this isn't a talking point. I mean, to me, I just look and you go, at least 30 years, you know, we've had homelessness increase, mental health problems increase, suicides increase. You know, these are realities, and something really has to change. Throwing more money at it, just certainly at a state level, isn't going to get us there. And I'm not saying we don't need more shelters and things, but I think really being strategic at the local community levels is more bang for our buck. Okay, we are at 12:33. I am going to wrap up for today. I will stick around how many of you, and please don't just raise your hand, make me feel good, I have a lot of friends out here, so thank you. But did you all feel this format was helpful? Was this a good format? Did you feel it was useful? Raise your hand. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you who came, and especially those who, we may not think alike on everything. That's healthy. I think that's super healthy. And I appreciate the dialogue. And the reality is, if I'm not willing to listen, and we can't have this respectful dialogue, that is, one, not doing my job in my opinion, but two, I can't live in a box. Some things I do have pretty strong values on, and they probably won't change. However, I do want to be able to listen, and I do want to be respectful, and I appreciate that you came and you took the time to do that. So thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up today. I want to say thanks to Clark County today for being here. They did a great job of everything for the event. So thank you for that. With that, we'll wrap up and say, I will mention one last thing. February 22nd, Saturday, February 22nd, I am going to hold another town hall. I can't commit for sure yet, but I believe our Senator Linda Wilson will also be with me, joining me on that, or us doing that together. I don't want to make it like I'm the grand poobah. I'm not necessarily. And I am not sure yet about Representative Harris. I just haven't had a chance to talk to him. But I just want to say thank you again for taking your time, coming, sharing, and listening. So with that, have a great rest of the afternoon.